Shehu, I want to ask.
That communication dates back to when it was born. Efforts have been made repeatedly to ban or restrict the operations of that communications. Apart from harassing me regularly to comment on national issues, just like Michael said, comment, without any payment, on some occasions that the AIT has been alleged to have crossed or to have committed some offenses, we have also been challenged to intervene. Unlike now, that the NBC suspends and imposes fines on media houses at will. There was an occasion that the AIT was alleged, I think through Mike Aruleba, to have embarrassed the president of the nation by reporting that our president was riding a second-hand plane that was said to be a seditious act for which the reporter and some other journalists were arrested. I think they got their news from AIT. They were arrested and charged before the court. That was in 2001 under President Obasanjo. But we only filed an objection, Mike, as you will recall, that the provisions of the criminal code on sedition have been declared illegal and unconstitutional as far back as 1983. But our government still decided to lift that provision of the law from the grave to harass the organization. But these days, I understand you pay fines regularly, and I do hope that one of these days you will instruct my colleague in Abuja here, Chief Michael Zekerman, to challenge the legality of imposing fines on people, organizations without going to court. Having said that, let me say I'm delighted to be in your midst today to contribute to this great debate. I actually tried to decline the invitation because I didn't think I could satisfy this distinguished audience because I'm really not an ethnic champion. I prefer to look at the crisis confronting our country from a class perspective. So I'm sure you are going to understand where I'm coming from if I fail to satisfy your expectation. Let me start by thanking Dar Communications PLC, owners of the iconic Ray Power Radio Network and the Pan-Africanist African Independent Television, AIT, for ever deepening discourse continentally with emphasis on Nigeria. I feel honored to have been invited to deliver the keynote address at these 4th Dar Awards. The theme I've been asked to speak on, ethnic nationalities and the emerging challenges managing Project Nigeria, speaks to the very challenge of Nigeria as a country. Ethnicity and the human being. All humans are born into one society or another. The basic instinct of the human being is preservation. It begins by identifying with his immediate environment and the people around him, especially his parents or guardians, and expands from there to his community and ethnic group, to wider groups onto his race. The nuclear family into which a human being is born belongs to a social group which has a distinct culture, language, a usually contiguous geography and religion. This is called ethnicity. It is an identity we do not choose on our own. We are simply born into it. It is not a matter in which we have a choice. So while a human being can change his name, school, job, if he has one, spouse, political party, ideology, religion, and even country, he cannot change his ethnicity. It is therefore one of the most ridiculous things to hold a person accountable for his ethnicity, a matter in which he has no choice. Given this reality, there may be no basis for discrimination, subordination, clampdown, or massacre of people based on their ethnic origins. Ethnic groups alone, but usually in concert with other established societies, nations or states. Sometimes, as in the case of colonialism or conquest, this is imposed. But no matter how ethnic groups become part of the same country, for there to be peace, harmony, and development, there must be equitable and just social relations. That's my first solution. This is why it is important to run inclusive governments in states and countries. Many countries have majority and minority ethnic groups, but it's how they are managed and treated that will determine the well-being of such a country or political stability in such a country. Even if a country is monolithic, there may still be differences which only continuous, just social relations can cure. Somalia, for instance, has a core ethnic group that makes up over 90% of the population and one single religion. Yet, the core Somali clans have had unresolved differences for ages. So, Somalia, since the overthrow of Mohamed Siad in January 1991, has been virtually at war. That is 30 years now. And there is no end in sight. It means a country having a single ethnic group and religion is no guarantee for peace. And I think this is very important for Nigerians to understand. Ethnic politics in Nigeria. What is today Nigeria? It's an amalgam of multi-ethnic and some say multi-religious, multi-ethnic nationalities, which for hundreds of thousands of years before colonialism had coexisted. We talk of the transatlantic trade and the rest of that. So it was not in 1914 that our people came together for the first time, contrary to misleading theories by bourgeois historians. At the birth of nationalism in Nigeria, ethnicity did not play a major factor as it has come to play today. The major nationalist movement, and this is important for all of us, the National Council of Nigeria and the Cameroons, NCNC, was a creation of pan-national groups like the trade unions, student movement, and pan-Africanists like Herbert Macaulay, Nnamdi Azikiwe. In fact, Azikiwe came from the United States and having collaborated with the Nkrumah, Du Bois, and the rest of them, he was born with the value of Pan-Africanism. When Macaulay, who was from Western Nigeria, died, all rallied behind the Secretary General, Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, who was from the East. So strong was the non-ethnic origins and base of the NC that in the West, in Western Nigeria, from colonial times until the 1979 elections, the dominant Yoruba party in the region, the Action Group, did not win elections in the major cities like Abeokuta, Ibadan, and Ife. The NCNC always swept the elections in the main urban center, even though the NCNC later became a regional party in the East. It competed with the AG in the West and MPC in the North in terms of development, unlike now. And it's very sad that up till now, we still refer to the development of our country up to the First Republic. The colonialists did not hide their dubious agenda to hand over the control of our country to the nationalist class, nationalist group, for easy manipulation of the country. Those who fought for independence of Nigeria, and I can say this without any fear of contradiction, are not the Ahmadu Bellos, the Awolowos, the Azikiwe. No. Those who fought for the independence of Nigeria are young people, activists, and I refer in particular to the Zikis movement. These were young people, Amdala, Enahoro, Mogo Okoye, Aguna, and others, who motivated by the ideal of Pan-Africanism espoused by Dr. Nnamdi Azikiwe, decided to come together and demanded for the socialist reconstruction of Nigeria from colonial rule. In 1945, that group organized a lecture like we are having today, where it demanded for a call for revolution. Because of that lecture, the members of the group were rounded up by the colonial regime and jailed for sedition. Because according to the British colonial regime, these guys were trying to chase us out of Nigeria. Of course, you also had the workers' strike of 1945, led by Labour leader number 1, Imodu. You also had other activists like Fela's mother, Funmilayo Ransome Kuti, Sawaba, Gambo, and others, and Margaret Echo, who, following the 1929 massacre of 55 women by the British colonial regime in Aba for fighting against double taxation. You can't tax my husband and tax me. That was what the women were fighting about. In 1929, 55 were killed. In 1949, 21 coal miners were killed in Enugu. You don't read about this in your history books. But Nigerian women mobilized, decided to lead, to join the struggle, to be in the front of the struggle for independence. It was because of the fact that the workers, the student movement, and the women of our country were mobilizing against colonial rule, that the British colonial regime decided to co-opt the nationalist politicians into this business of handing over Nigeria. Because it was clear that while the British government did not move fast, colonialism would be defeated on the terms dictated by Nigerians. But what happened was that independence was given to us, according to many historians, on a platter of gold. That is dubious. People were killed, there were wars, there were fought all over the country. the country, in the north, in the east, in the west. Some of our traditional rulers, particularly Jaja Okokobo, was deposed and deported to the Caribbean for challenging the control of coastal trade by the British. Of course, you are aware that Overani of Benin was also deposed and deported. So our people went through a hell. So please, we have to rewrite the history of our country and not all this thing about, oh, the British government was very generous, they gave independence to us. No, we fought for independence. Another one that I need to correct for us in law and political science, you are told that the Bill of Rights was given to us in order to allay the fears of the minority. Bullshit, it's not true. In Ghana that got independence before Nigeria, there was a chapter on Bill of Rights. India had a chapter on Bill of Rights. What the British did is to say, we need to include a chapter on human rights in the constitution we are giving to this people. Otherwise, our interests will be nationalized. It talks about Nigeria. 2, we may be challenged for committing crimes against humanity under colonial rule. That was the basis. Not for us to allay the fears of. If they wanted to allay the fears of the minorities, why did they not create regions for them? Now, the political class did not manage independence well. So by 1965, the old system virtually grounded to a halt, which led to the coup of 1966, led by Major Nzeogo, Kaduna Nzeogo. At first, it wasn't seen as an ethnic thing. But later, you know, having regards to the fact that the killing did not reflect federal character, which apparently was not intended, you know, but that was the offense. So you had a counter coup in July 1966, which tried to, you know, kill more people. This time around, military officers were killed who could stand on the way. And of course, for several years, the military destroyed whatever was left of the unity of Nigeria. By 1993, our country had the best election, in which, for the first time, you had a Muslim ticket that won the election. In fact, the NRC ticket was a Muslim-Christian ticket, but that didn't bother people. It was an election in which the presidential candidate of the NRC was defeated by the presidential candidate of the SDP. In his own word, in Kano, an Abeokuta man. But what happened? Instead of building on such pan-Nigerian mandate, the Babangida junta, one of the greatest offenses committed against Nigeria, annulled the election in an attempt to transmute, to metamorphose from a military dictator to a civilian president. That was the whole basis. Now, today, you know, we haven't come out of that crisis. But what has happened? Distinguished audience, what has happened? The situation today, you have a situation today where a government in power deliberately promotes the disunity of our country. Through lopsided appointments, and selective prosecution of corrupt people. Selective. We have a situation where the chief law officer of the country will sign an agreement with somebody who is alleged to have stolen billions, and then thou shalt go and say no more, and the cases pending in court are withdrawn, while others, like Chief Raymond Dokwesi, are made to go through the entire gamut, like a criminal system. You can't run a country where you have selective application of the law. It's not possible. Now, and some of the statements oozing out of power of the villa promotes disunity. When you say, oh, farmers were killing Borno or Maiduguri, Borno State. Oh, the farmer did not tell the soldier before going to their farm, I beg your pardon. From the seat of power, instead of sympathizing with those who have lost their loved ones, young people were demonstrating against police brutality. You kill them, not just in Lagos. In Ogbomoso, 4 were killed. In Benin, over 25 were killed. In Port Harcourt, scores were killed. Abuja here, you saw thugs in broad daylight in a city where you have all the embassies. Thugs were being ferreted, carried all over the place, and they were shooting at protesters. Thugs were unleashed on unarmed protesters. At the end of the day now, in a place like Lagos, the pathologists of the government went to a panel and said 99 dead bodies were dumped in the morgue. 3 of them traced to Lekki. And Lagos State government has come out with a white paper. Nobody died. Nobody died. In Zaria, in December 2015, under a democratic government, and it has never happened in any African country. Not even in Rwanda, during the genocide, were hundreds killed and buried in a mass grave. And people in Lagos, a minister of information and culture, against the culture of Africa, came out to say, where are the relations of all those who died? Why have they not come out? And I asked him, Honorable Minister, where are the relations of the people killing Zaria? Even your own commission of inquiry, we never knew. The Judicial Commission of Inquiry set up by the government said 348 people were killed and buried quietly, secretly. And we're in a democracy. You may not like the sheikhs, you may not like the young people, but they deserve to live. And so don't follow the government. Don't engage in this fixation. It's not about Lekki alone. They're only talking about Lekki. What of the other 96 people who were killed? Are they not human beings? And I have said it publicly in Nigeria. It is always difficult because majority of the people involved are illiterates. So you don't want to come out and say, I lost my loved one, because you may be arrested by the government for giving birth to a young man that staged a protest. That's it. So nobody comes out, and the government, they are not denying that people have died. But we are simply saying it is not our business. Now, I'm going to specifics on some of the statements made by the government, which have continued to incite our people against the unity of the country. As far as members of the ruling class are concerned, the issue of the unity of Nigeria is a foregone conclusion for them. Hence, two of the country's former rulers, and both of them spent up to 20 years in power, General Olusegun Obasanjo and General Ibrahim Babangida, issued a joint press statement in July 2012, wherein they maintained rather arrogantly, and I quote them, "The unity of Nigeria is not negotiable." End of quote. In his own defense of the unity of Nigeria, President Buhari has pointedly accused the proponents of restructuring or power devolution of trying to break up the country. Even though it's in the manifesto of the party, of the APC. But the president says anybody who talks about restructuring is trying to break up the country. Having taken part in the Civil War, this retired general claimed to have resolved on their own to keep Nigeria one, united. For there is no basis whatsoever for the grandstanding of our retired military officer as they have disingenuously relied on Section 2(1) of the 1999 Constitution, which states, and I quote, "Nigeria is one indivisible and indissoluble sovereign state to be known as the Federal Republic of Nigeria." End of quote. But they, the military officers, ensured in 1979 and 1999 that what they handed over to Nigeria or Nigerians is a unitary system of government, not a Federal Republic of Nigeria. The indictment of political leaders in cases of ethno-religious violence in the country demonstrates a particular dangerous feature of the connection between religion and politics in the Nigerian contextual environment. For instance, in his report regarding the Matasine riot, the Justice and the Agoli Tribunal found, and I quote, "There are various levels of involvement, ranging from Matasine himself and his followers to the state government and its agencies, individuals, organizations, the police, and the National Security Organization." End of quote. A leader of the Boko Haram sect was a commissioner in the Borno state government. I'm talking of Sheriff's government in Borno State. In 2003, he sat down with the Boko Haram leaders. "Will you please vote for me? I want you to work for my election." He said, "Yes, on one condition. You will make one of us the commissioner for religious affairs in your government." And he agreed. And he did. But what happened? In order to cover up the involvement of the government in how terrorism emerged in the country, the commissioner, the leader of the Boko Haram sect, Yusuf, and his father-in-law were killed, exterminated in detention. And that was when that sect pronounced fatwa on the Nigerian state. Now, the point I'm making is that the members of the ruling class, whether in Jos, in Kano, Borno, wherever, are involved in using religion and ethnicity to cause disunity in our country. And they come out arrogantly. The unity of Nigeria is not negotiable. The unity that you are subverting on a daily basis. As I've shown elsewhere, ethnicity is given. It is only that in Nigeria, people, especially the elite class, manipulate it for selfish reasons and have so far abused it that all ethnic groups feel vulnerable and marginalized, if not endangered. All ethnic groups now. Yet, ethnicity does not define the person or character, does not confer either wisdom or foolishness, morality or immorality, intelligence or stupidity, wickedness or righteousness. Where in forward-looking country, there are policies and programs to empower the weak and the marginalized. In Nigeria, the strong and powerful majority seek to take advantage over the rest of the society. Minority groups take advantage of minority groups. In the United States, the bastion of federalism and the bastion of capitalism. The program is called affirmative action to assist the poor, the weak in Nigeria. It is known as the federal character principle. It is entrenched in Section 14 of the Constitution that the government of Nigeria shall be constituted in such a way to give a sense of belonging to every part of the country. But is that what we have today? Others include, listen, catchment area, quota system, and so on and so forth, which are employed more often to further divide the country. For me, there are two ethnic groups in Nigeria, two major ethnic groups. Listen to me. Ours is a nation, sharply divided between the rich and the poor. Ours is a country of two nations, the nation of the haves and the nation of the have-nots. Ours is a society of a minority of exploiters and a majority of exploited people. Even though the Constitution stipulates that citizens shall have equal rights and opportunities, such equality does not exist in practice. Hence, the fundamental rights enshrined in the Constitution are enjoyed exclusively by the rich who have the financial means to challenge the violations of their rights. When you violate the rights of a poor man or a poor woman, he will tell you, God will judge. But the poor man says, call me my lawyer, and he will brief his lawyer to go to court. Every Nigerian has freedom of movement, but the passport is sold officially for 50, I think about 30,000 now. How does a person who lives on less than 350 naira acquire a passport? So when people talk about ethnic groups, we conveniently, the elite, conveniently forget the poor in their own ethnic group. But how many citizens have the means to buy land? Because the conscience says you can acquire land anywhere in Nigeria and settle there. But how many Nigerians have the money to pay for land and acquire certificate of occupancy from the government? For them, for the poor, the unity of Nigeria means the fundamental right to live in dignity, which can only be actualized through the equitable redistribution of the abundant wealth and resources of our country. On the other hand, the unity of Nigeria is non-negotiable for members of the ruling class because they are profiting from the injustice and oppression on which the unity is built. Regardless of ethnicity and religion, the rich are united in the boardrooms of private and public companies. They don't fight when they want to steal or to loot the treasury. They don't fight. They meet in clubs at home and abroad. The rich live in mansions in estates and in posh areas in urban centers. They shop in malls and supermarkets at home and abroad. Whenever they are indisposed, they are treated in private hospitals at home and abroad. In the states where workers are owed arrears of salaries for several months, former public officers owe pension. Governors and legislators are paid their double emolument as and when due. You have never heard that a governor was not paid his salary. No, not in Nigeria. And there is no fight in the National Assembly when you are talking about padding the budgets or paying unapproved salaries and allowances to members. There is no fight. Unlike in the Second Republic, you could predict where the UPN and PRP legislator what they will vote for. Why the NPN, NPP, you could predict where either will vote. These days, there is no problem in the National Assembly. All the members, regardless of political parties, vote one way or the other. Now, restructuring. How people are talking of restructuring. They are talking of restructuring without economic power. And I want to say, all parts of Nigeria, contrary to what you are told, all parts of Nigeria are part of the struggle for restructuring. And I will show that in a moment. In a recent lecture, I observed that, let me just say this, between 1999 and now, and Chief of the Government can bear me out, not less than 10 cases filed by the 36 state government, not southern states, 36 state government, have the Supreme Court, Court of Appeal and High Court, Federal Court, have taken some powers hitherto exercised by the federal government. Powers that were hijacked under the military. The courts are giving those powers to state government, and all the 36 state government are benefiting maximally from the result of those cases. One, local governments have now been recognized by the Supreme Court to be the affairs of state government. Thou shalt not seize the fund of local government, statutory allocation. You know that in the case of Lagos. Thou shalt not get involved in the election of local governments. Thou shalt not monitor the funds of local government. These are all cases decided against the federal government. Furthermore, for the coastal states, Lagos went to court. I can't be going to Abuja if we want to, have our boats in our waterways. And the Court of Appeal said, yes, inland waterways shall be controlled by state government. It is when the waters are intra that you can talk about the federal government. The federal government was collecting entertainment fees. The Supreme Court said, no, that is not in the exclusive list. Only state government can collect entertainment levies. So, hospitality levies, hotels and the rest of it. Federal government was collecting. Federal government was managing physical planning. If you wanted to build a house, you had to go to the federal secretariat in your state for approved plan. The Supreme Court said no. Physical planning is the business of the state. Land. The Supreme Court held that it is the governor of every state that shall be in charge and manage land. So if President Buhari, I've said it publicly, if President Buhari wants, or if the federal government wants to have a project in Sokoto or Borno or Delta, the federal government will have to apply to the state government. And that is the country today. Every state has benefited from the devolution of power. So let nobody deceive you that this struggle for restructuring, or let nobody claim that the struggle for restructuring is being only a part of the country is campaigning for it. All parts of the country are benefiting. And I can refer to other cases. Without these cases, I submit, many of the state governments will have collapsed economically. And the last one is the one of VAT. The federal government has just discovered that no amount of legal sophistry can make it win that case. So they are now thinking of, can we negotiate? So, and that is our country for you. So the point I'm making therefore is that restructuring through litigation is already part of the gains of the democratic struggle. But let me know one. All these powers that have been taken from Abuja, all of them have been honored by state governors. Today, in every state, all the seats, local government seats, chairmanship position, all the councillors, all the seats are won by the ruling party, regardless of the political party. So, the point I'm making therefore is that, yes, but I'm saying that this business of destruction has left out the economy. Has left out the economy. And I'll give you two instances. The NNPC and the LNG were built with money from the federation account. This is very important. Not money from the federal government account, from the federation account. But today, it is the president alone that gives oil blocks that are part of the mineral resources of our country, taken over from the owners and vested in the federation. NNPC has been unbundled. Today, all the board members are appointed by all the companies that are set up are companies of the federal government, whereas they should be companies of the federation, of the federal government, states, and local government. Richard, let me just try and conclude. Two issues are very important, I beg you. The question of official impunity. Official impunity, that nobody can challenge the federal government for breaching the constitution, for disobeying court order. I'll just give two instances. The fight on terror. The Attorney General announced in April this year that 400 sponsors of terrorism have been arrested and detained. And we're going to give you their names very soon. When the gentleman was asked recently in the United States, I think September this year, why have you not released the name? He said, that will undermine investigation. But that same regime gives us the names of so-called looters in the PDP. For the poor, they are paraded every day by the police. But when it comes to sponsors of terrorism, we are told that their name, the disclosure of their name will cause problem. Secondly, 3 policemen went to arrest Wadume, a criminal suspect, powerful criminal suspect. 10 soldiers chased the police and killed them. They were charged before the federal court here. The Attorney General would do the cases against the soldiers. So they're working free. And you want to fight terrorism. It was easy to ban IPOB and the Islamic movement in Nigeria. But to ban the so-called terrorists, it's been very difficult for the federal government. On the management of NDDC, this is very important. The NDDC under the law shall be managed by a board representing the 9 oil-producing states. Since 2019, for the past 3 years, President Buhari has put the law aside. He started by constituting an interim management committee. And when the government was challenged, we were told, please, an auditor was looking into the records of the company. The organization. Once the auditing is concluded, we shall have a board. The auditing has been completed. What do you have now? A sole administrator, unknown to law. But that is not all. In a very lopsided arrangement, today, the Minister of Niger Delta, the sole administrator of NDDC, and the special advisor to the President on Niger Delta are all from Akwa Ibom State. It is the same thing with National Human Rights Commission, which are our area. He has a 60-member board council. 4 are from Northwest. Nobody from Northeast, where the greatest number of human rights violations take place. So the point I'm making, therefore, ladies and gentlemen, is that the government itself promotes disunity in our country, and if we want to fight for unity, we must factor in, we must take cognizance of the role of members of the ruling class. They don't believe in Nigeria. They only deceive Nigeria. Conclusion, Richard. Worried about the rising wave of poverty in the land, a legislator, Honorable Sergius Ogun, recently sponsored a bill to make chapter 2 of the constitutional justice system. It was defeated. The bill was defeated. The honorable member said, if we have this bill, you are going to cause governors in the state to have sleepless nights. Where would they get the money? It is my submission that by rejecting the bill, the members of the House of Representatives have only postponed the evil day, because poverty has become completely intolerable in our country. Permit me, in conclusion, to remind the members of the legislature, the executive, and even the judiciary of the cautionary words of former American President J.F. Kennedy, and I quote him: if a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Paradon. As vintage effort, let's put your hands together again for effort. Come a very long way, Femi Falana and myself, in the struggle. A lot of people do not know right from Ife in the 80s, even when we impeached the then speaker, I don't want to mention his name, of the Students' Parliament. I raised the motion for his impeachment, and then the speaker now decided to preside again over the motion. So I said, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's the principle of nemo judex in causa sua. No one must be a judge in his cause. Femi Falana jumped up and said, I support Michael Zekomet. You cannot be a judge in your cause. So with that, we impeached the speaker. And I was elected the speaker pro tempore over 45 years ago. And we've come a long way also with Richard Akinola, with whom and myself and 4 others, we founded the first human rights body in Nigeria, the Civil Liberties Organization, CLO, on the 15th of October, 1987. Because at that time, our mentor, our grandfather in the human rights community, Chief Gani Fawehinmi, had been going it solo. And we thought that we needed some teamwork to be able to fight the military. And Femi Falana, Bekor, and Sonkuti and others were also later to found the Committee for the Defense of Human Rights, the National Association of Democratic Lawyers, the Campaign for Democracy, and with all that, we started fighting the military. We just wake up on a daily basis on the streets to fight the military. And by 1998, Femi Falana, myself, and Chief Gani Fawehinmi, and others, Tunji Abayomi, Clement Nwankwo, Olisa Agbakova, we came together again and said, let's get an umbrella for these splinter group human rights bodies. That was how we founded the Joint Action Committee of Nigeria, the JACOM. Chief Gani Fawehinmi was the national chairman. I was the national vice chairman, publicity and publications. Falana was the national vice chairman in charge of mobilization. So, why did I give this little history? It is to tell you that when we talk like this, it is not because we want people to hear us talk. It is because we are involved. Like Obasanjo's novel will say, we are stakeholders, critical stakeholders. So when these people messing up our democracy, who were hiding behind the backs of their wives, some of them running abroad on exile, they didn't know what we were going through. When Ganifa and me, Falana and myself, Richard, will be covering our nose, rubbing kerosene on our noses after we have been sprayed with tear gas, and Ganifa and me collapsing, we will carry him on our shoulders. They don't know where we are coming from. They just gather like witches and wizards to share the common patrimony of the country. I want to thank High Chief Alego Raymond Dokwesi. You've done very well for Nigeria and Africa. Spearheading the very first private broadcasting station in the entire Africa. When I will blaze the Western Nigeria Broadcasting Service in 1957, nobody knew that a young man like you, who was barely a toddler then, will come and start the first private broadcasting station. And the powers that be never wanted this station to stay. 6 times they had closed down their communication. 6 times I had gone to court to get their communication open through the law court. So I want to thank you. And I thank the young Alego Jr. just coming on. And I thank my senators here, Oyofo and Akobun and others who are here. My brothers here, Senator Sheusani, the stormy tempest, and our professor and my other brother here. Having done this little preamble, I want to say, Richard, that the question you ask is quite simple to answer. I will answer it first, then give a background. The simple answer is that Femi Falana got it right. That the situation, the insecurity, the what you call these rearers, these cow rearers that we are seeing today getting more emboldened, is because of the divisive tendency of the government in power that frontally and deliberately exacerbate our national woes. When we were growing up, I am from a little village called Ivukwe. It's now getting bigger, near Agenebode. It's called this local government. We will go to Agenebode deliberately to see cows pass through the tarred road leading from Agenebode to Auchi. And we will see the cow rearers with kola nut stained teeth. They were elderly people. And we'll be singing and shouting, Malu Koga, Malu Koga, Daba Daba Koga, beside Yegeta Kia, Iduni Beta Moabo, Nebea Boo Boo. Let me translate it. Translated, we will say, Malu, that's cows that have hooves. Malu Kova, cows that have hooves. They are going along the road, being led by elderly people who are carrying sticks with which they hit them, whipping them to line. That means they were carrying only sticks. They were not carrying AK-47 rifles. They were not armed. When we sang, they will look at us and laugh and go under the cow and drain some milk for us to drink. In return, we will give them a pitcher of water and we'll be running after them. Some of them, over the night, they will stay with us in our homes while the cows graze quietly on the grass. There was no problem. So when I hear people talk about cattle or herders, farmers clashes, I say, I beg your pardon. That is a terrible, offensive misnomer. There's nothing like herders, farmers skirmishes. It is just that the farmers are being attacked directly on their farms, being killed, being maimed, their wives being raped, their daughters being raped. And then they again audaciously go to their homes and rape their wives and rape their mothers on their own farms. And then you are calling it cattle rearers, farmers clashes? Which clashes? One is a victim, the other one is an aggressor. But because you are refusing to put the right finger on the right spot of the problem, you can never solve it. There's no one more difficult to wake up like someone who is pretending to be asleep. This government is pretending to be asleep. So you can't wake it up. Now, ethnicity, like Falana rightly put it, is ascribed to us. We didn't buy it. I grew up to meet myself as a person from Ijukwe. I can't be a Yoruba man. You can't expect me to be a Hausa Fulani man. Nor will I ever be an Igbo man. Professor Onigu Otite did a demographic survey of Nigeria and discovered that Nigeria has 374 ethnic groups. But we wrongly ascribe Nigeria, wherever we are speaking, to 3 ethnic groups. We say Hausa Fulani as one block, the Yorubas of Femi Falana and Richard as another block, and then the Igbos as a third block. That is a tripod. Of course, you all know that a tripod is not balanced. It will wobble, it will grumble, and it will crumble because it is not balanced. So when you call Femi Falana's Yoruba, you call Shehu Sani's Hausa Fulani, then you call Clement Nwanko's Igbo. I ask you, where do you put my own circle group? Of the 374 ethnic groups, where do you put the Birons, the Anans, the Bibius, the Epics, the Galas? Where do you put the Jaws, the Urobos, the Isokos? Where do you put the Ogonis? Where do you put the Benis, the Ishans? Where do you put the TVs, the Ebiras? Where do you put them? What of the Igbagis? Are you saying they are not important to the system? So you think God created us here to come and be clappers? To be hewers of wood and drawers of water? To massage your bloated ego? When you enthrone social injustice, you can't have peace. The best peace you can have is what Eko Abiola will call peace of the graveyard. There is no place as peaceful as a cemetery or graveyard. But that is not the kind of peace we are asking for. We are asking for peace that is imbued with egalitarianism, with social justice, equity, and good conscience. You can't be talking about peace when a government deliberately engaged in nepotism, sectionalism, prebendalism, when a government is glaringly engaged in favoritism, in appointments, 95% of your appointees to the national security apparatus are from one side of the country and from one religion, and the A-class list of ministerial appointees are from one class of the nation and one religion, specifically the North and Islam. And you forget that I am a Christian. You forget that even the Holy Prophet Muhammad himself, peace be unto him, in the Holy Quran, chapter 109, verse 1, When the people of Makkah told him, if you can worship our little gods and goddesses for a while, then we can worship your own Almighty Allah. He said something to the following effect: I worship not that which you worship, nor do you worship that which I worship. Do not expect me to worship that which you worship, nor should I expect you to worship that which I worship. To you, your religion, and to me, my religion. He was preaching secularism, which has been embedded in Section 10 of the 1999 Constitution. But our present state captors believe they can use religion, like Karl Marx once put it, as an opium of the masses. That is why we are where we are, and that is why we cannot move forward. Let me tell you, in terms of these problems, they didn't just start today. Even our founding fathers have recognized them. As far back as 1946, there was a group discussion, and the Zik of Africa, the same Dr. Benjamin Nnamdi Azikiwe, told the Sardauna of Sokoto, Sir Ahmadu Bello, he said, let us forget our differences and move on. Ahmadu Bello had a fantastic, very wise answer. He said, no, Azikiwe, we cannot forget our differences. We must recognize our differences. I am a Muslim and a Northerner. You are a Christian and an Easterner. When we understand our differences, then we can build on it in terms of unity. That was Ahmadu Bello's reply. But earlier in 1942, it was the same Ahmadu Bello who had described Nigeria as a piece of historical mistake. Chief Obafemi Awolowo, in his book, Pathway to Nigerian Freedom, in 1947, said Nigeria was a piece of geographical expression. There are no Nigerians in the same way as there are Scots, Welsh, and English. Gowon in 1966 in his first maiden broadcast, he said there's no basis for Nigerian unity. So they mobilized and said they were going to carry out a bicycle operation from Nsukka axis to defeat the Ojukwu-led Biafran struggle. The rest is history. A 3-year bloody civil war. So you know when a war will start, but you can never know when it will end. So, as far back as the 1890s, when the British, the Germans, and the French and the Portuguese were partitioning us through people like Otto von Bismarck and the rest, we already had these problems. But my brother noted it very well, that the Nigerian state people were already settled in their enclaves, enjoying their independence before British intrusion. Particularly after the 1st of January 1914, through the amalgamation of Southern and Northern protectorates to found Nigeria. Nigeria herself derived her name from Niger area, a name given to her by a young British journalist called Flora Louisa Shaw. In an article she wrote on the 8th of January 1897, in the London Economic Times, she was later to marry Captain Lord Lugard, the man who amalgamated Northern and Southern protectorates. So the problems, therefore, continue to stare us in the face because we were forcefully brought together from Hausa city-states, Igbo city-states, Kano Bonu Empire, the Oyo Empire, the Benin Kingdom, Oba Ovoramino Ogbaise, who beat the British with bare knuckles, leading to the British punitive expedition of 1897, for which he was deported to Calabar, where he lived for 27 years before he died. All the problems have been there. Didn't we see Nana of King Nana of Ichekure, King Jaja of Okobo that you referred to? We were settled, Madam Tinubu, Queen Amina, Queen Idia. But the forcible coupling together of Nigeria, direct rule system, indirect rule system, after many constitutional conferences and problems, the 1922 Clifford Constitution, the 1946 Arthur Richards Constitution, the 1951 Littleton Constitution, Macpherson Constitution, and the 1954 Littleton Constitution. All this could not help us until the federal government was forced to set up the Willings Minority Commission report, which sat between November and June, November 1957 and June 1958, to discuss the fears of the minorities. Were they real? Were they genuine? Were they phantom? And they came out with the report that the fears were genuine, but that the fears were not against the federal government at the center, but against the regional government. But instead of tackling the matter squarely, as you rightly noted, they decided to treat a serious ailment like leprosy with eczema medicine by saying, oh, let us create a Bill of Rights modeled after the European Convention and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948. So they doled out tokenism. Let us give the Niger Delta a board. Let us treat the issue of COR, Calabar, Ogoja, Rivers, territories. Let us look at the issue of Ilori and the Kapa area.
Please try to round up.
So they treated the issues without really tackling them. And that is why the issues continue to fester. And so when you now have a government which, instead of giving us a sense of belonging as one nation, you are creating policies that are highly divisive, turning one ethnic group against another, showing preferential treatment for one religion against the other, treating some bandits and Boko Haramis with kid gloves, reintegrating some of them into your military, and then banning IPOD, but refusing to ban this same group, which has been declared the third most dangerous terrorist group in the world. You cannot have a country, a nation built on nationhood in that manner. We need good governance, we need reintegration, we need inclusiveness, we need transparency in governance.
Thank you so much.
We need a brand new constitution. I must end that.
Thank you so much.
So that we cannot continue to say that Nigeria is indivisible, is indestructible. Who told you? USSR is today about 15 states, 15 independent countries. Were they not one? Where is Eritrea and Ethiopia? Where is Sudan and South Sudan? Where is Egypt, Pakistan? And Egypt, Pakistan, and they were three, and they were together. India. So please, Nigeria, for God's sake, is divisible if you do not nurture her unity well and properly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, my friend. I will, before I answer the question, appreciate the presentation of Comrade Femi Falana for his keynote address. To me and to many other activists, we will always appreciate the struggle, the determination and commitment and the sacrifice which Falana has made over the years. And wherever I go, I will make it very clear. Sometimes in the 90s, Falana came to Kaduna and met me, and he drafted me into the CDHR and the Campaign for Democracy. And since that visit, I lost my peace because I kept moving from one prison to another. So I believe we should always appreciate those who have made such sacrifices. He stood for Fela, stood for Kensaro Wiwa, and he stood for several others up to Shore. I think we should appreciate him while alive. The nation will never forget how Falana, during the Oputa Commission, have stood in defense of the persecuted and victims of military dictatorship that we have experienced in this country. So we should not forget history on that. Michael Zokome was another comrade whom we have been fighting over the years. He made mention of one of the organizations which they founded, which was Joint Action Committee, JACO. Unfortunately for me, when the organization was founded, I was in prison. So I came out of prison in 1998, and automatically I was given a front seat in that organization at the chambers of Gani Fawahi. So I will also not relent in appreciating Falana. During my period of imprisonment, I was sentenced to life in prison and then commuted to 15 years. So I served 4 years until Abacha died, and throughout the 4 years of my imprisonment, he has always been in touch and supportive of me during those times. Having said that, Richard is someone who is confidently and comfortably moderating in Abuja. We have been inviting him to Kaduna to come and moderate most of our seminars and conferences, and he has been turning it down. So I will use this opportunity to expose him to the public, to say he has been very selective in the kind of seminars and conferences that he offers himself service to. So you can see how not only the people in the position of power that are being nepotistic, but someone like Richard is choosing where to go. And that, I believe, is very wrong. Having said that, I must say this, that the topic in discussion here is apt, especially in a nation that is in search of a new future. It is a fact that every country of the world has its own headache and heartache. In Spain, they are battling with Catalonia. In the UK, Scotland is trying to secede from UK. America has a race issue to solve. In China, Tibet is the problem. And in India, Kashmir is a problem. So you can see that nations of the world have their own problems, just like nature. It has not promised you a life that is comfortable and convenient, but it has given you the wisdom to be able to navigate storms and turbulences in life, and that is what we need. So in this country, the history has been clearly narrated by Comrade Falana. And it is for us as a people to decide where do we want to go from here. I come from a state in the northwestern part of Nigeria today. I cannot move a kilometer outside of my state without getting into the hands of bandits. Bandits have laid siege to my state and to my own part of the country. They have moved from stopping commuters, picking hostages and extorting ransom. They have moved to become a state within a state, imposing levies, collecting fines and taxes to people. They have also moved further to installing chiefs and imams in some of the mosques and the villages within the northwestern part of Nigeria. So these are self-evident examples of symptoms of a failing state. And the state has failed because the leaders have failed. The nation today is on autopilot, despite there is a leadership. In the sense that the spate of killings in this country today has reached a point that even those in the position of power are tired of issuing condemnation and condolences. In the last few days, 27 Nigerians sank in a river in Kano. It never made any serious headlines. And you have never seen any federal delegation going to Kano to condole, unlike when a billionaire died there. You have not seen any serious empathy on the side of people in the position of power, simply because killings and tragedy has become the new normal in this country. Now, this is a government that has made all promises of restoring law and order in this country. But this is the situation we have found ourselves. So when people pick up arms against a state, it is a sign that that state has already created the atmosphere for them to pick up arms. No matter how we try to preserve Nigeria as an entity, I've said it time and again, the national flag cannot keep a nation one. The Constitution cannot keep a nation one. The national anthem and the national pledge, no matter how you try to sing it in every event, it can't keep a country together. When you don't have fairness, equity, and justice in a nation, there is no way that country simply lives on a time bomb. Having said that, the ethnic nationality is not the problem. We all come from different ethnic groups and different religious backgrounds. But the problem is ethnic nationalism, where people now have politicized their ethnicity, whether as a people or as people in the position of power, to destabilize the whole country. And this is something you see that comes from the top downwards. Nigerian leaders, when they speak in their own ethnic group, they promote division. And when they speak in English, when they know there's consequences, they promote national unity. And that is hypocrisy. There is no way you can keep a country together when you have a set of leaders whose agenda, whose mission in power is self-preservation and favoring people from their own political clan. That is the fact of the matter. Nigerian leaders don't see themselves as servants. They see themselves as conquerors who have conquered a territory, and as such the resources and the land and everything belongs to them. They can only trickle it to people whom they like. Now that is a problem. So as far as I'm concerned, if we don't sit down as a country and address those fundamental socio-economic and political problems that are seriously undermining the unity and peace of this country, we will simply be marking time, and it's a question of time for Nigeria to explode. let us not make any mistake about it. The ruling class are united in their determination to preserve power for their own ends. If this country go into flames, everyone will suffer it, but the most will be the common people. And so when you are fighting for justice, for freedom, and when you're fighting against bad governance and abuse of power, you are also fighting to preserve yourself and your family. So I will not take much time by saying that as far as I'm concerned, the part of the country I come from are now coming to the realization that it does not mean that the person who should be in the position of power must come from your ethnic group for all your problems to be solved. Obasanjo was a president for 8 years, and they are just talking about getting Lagos-Abeokuta Road back to order, Lagos-Badagry Road back to order, Lagos-Ibadan Road, after about 10 to 15 years when he was out of power. Buhari has been the president of Nigeria. When our people in North were dying and killing each other to ensure that this happens, today we have become a basket case. In Zamfara, in Katsina, in Kebbi, in Sokoto State, in Niger, in Kaduna. It has reached a point in some villages in Niger State that villagers call terrorists to protect them from bandits. So when people equate terrorists with bandits, and when we up there try to differentiate them, all we are saying is that terrorists have a name like Boko Haram, like ISWAP, like Ansar. But the bandits have a different strategy to extort ransom, to rape women, to rustle cattle. But those ones have a theocratic agenda. They come, they preach, they provide social services, they recruit. That is what they do. So you can see how the ungovernable spaces in Nigeria is even being competed by different terrorist groups. This is how we have failed as a country. I must appreciate the fact that efforts have been made, and we must appreciate the fact that there are gallant military and police officers who have sacrificed their lives in an attempt to protect us and defend this country. But the fact remains, if a government that is in power has proven ineffective and has failed to protect the nation and protect its people, it has no business being there. The worst of all is the fact that the parliament, the legislature, is supposed to serve as a check and balance to people in the executive position. When you have a compliant, placid, docile, and subservient parliament, you already have a dictatorship at hand. And this is what we are saying. Young people in this country have a duty to stand up and fight. To fight for what is their right, to fight for their own future. Because it is clear that those in the position of power, having been able to amass a lot of wealth, and also amass it for their children and grandchildren, they felt that they have already insured themselves. So the need to rescue and to protect and save Nigeria is in the hands of those who want to remain in Nigeria. And it is in the best interest of all of us. I thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you.
That have been more prevalent in the north-central states, like Benue, Plateau, Nasarawa, and parts of southern Kaduna. And it is a bit complex in the sense that the indigenes are those who consider the land as their ancestral homes. And the settlers are perhaps traders and others who come over there to settle for a number of period of time. And the conflict that has been going on is coming in different ways. It is either ethnic or religious, because the settlers in most cases are Muslims, as far as North Central is concerned, and the indigenes are mostly Christians from the different minority groups. And these ones are farmers, and these ones are traders. And these ones are farmers, and the other ones are herders. So conflicts has been over resources, and over land, and over political influence. As it is today, bandits that have been unleashing mayhem and killing people, they don't have any religious affiliation or identity. In Katsina, they go into a mosque, kidnap people and kill as many as they want. And in Kaduna, they target churches. But in this sense, if we have to address this problem, then it has to be done from both the local and state level. I've had the submission of Comrade Falana, where he has stated how the judicial system has been able to rescue some of the powers that have been usurped by the federal government to the state. But the fact is that the states today are more dictatorial than the federal government. Many of you who are advocating for state police, I cannot imagine myself from Kaduna State having a state police in Kaduna. It's just not possible. Because for all the governors are accusing the federal government of doing, they are also guilty of it. The National Assembly, as it is today, it is more freer than the State House of Assemblies. Local government chairmen are subservient to the governors. The State Assembly members, nobody dares to raise a hand and oppose, object, or criticize a governor. He stands the chance of being suspended from State Assembly. So most of the powers that the states are accusing the federal government of taking over, when it comes to them, they behave worse. So as far as I'm concerned, going back to your point, we can address the indigent settler problem when you have laws that clearly identify the problem and give both the settler and the indigenes equal opportunity. And also, apart from laws, there should be an institutional mechanism that will ensure regular interaction between the two sides, and that, I believe, will be a solution to the problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Thanks for checking out Symphony on YouTube. Please be sure to subscribe and like our videos for updates.